Today we'll speak about, the title is Wells Without Water. In St. Peter's epistle, he says what? These are wells without water, clouds carried by a tempest, for whom is reserved the blackness of darkness forever. Pretty morbid, huh? So it's basically he's saying it's like whatever he's speaking about, it's like well without water. What's the use of a well without water? No use at all, right? So what is the context of this verse? Let's read this together. Go ahead, somebody can read a few verses and you can pass it.
For if God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved for judgment, and did not spare the ancient world, but saved Noah, one of 8 people, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood on the world of the ungodly.
Okay, so what is he saying here is speaking about the time of Noah, right? So it's saying if God didn't spare the angels who have fallen, right, and didn't spare the people at the time of Noah, so meaning that there's a time where God is going to execute judgment, right? We call this the justice of God, okay? And he says to reserve for judgment. So in whose time is it the reservation of judgment? It's only God's time. Sometimes we might say, okay, now is the time to execute judgment, but he says, no, it's time to be patient. We might look at something and say, you know what, it's time, or we should be patient. And God says, no, it's time to execute judgment, right? Only in his time, he can execute this perfect judgment. Okay, let's continue.
And delivered righteous Lot, who was oppressed by the filthy conduct of the wicked, for the righteous man dwelling among them tormented his righteous soul from day to day by seeing and hearing their lawless deeds. Then the Lord knows how to deliver the godly out of temptation and to reserve the unjust under punishment of the day of judgment, and especially those who walk accordingly to the flesh in the lust of uncleanness and despise authority. So
the second one example he gives is the example of Lot. And he says 2 things about this story about Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah. He says the Lord knows how to deliver the godly. Who did he deliver in this story? Lot? Only? Who else? Who else did he deliver? His children and his wife, like his family. Those are the ones he delivered, okay? And then at the same time, you find what? To reserve the unjust under punishment for the day of judgment. So while he was showing mercy and delivering Lot and his family, he also executed judgment on the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. And he continues and says, especially those who walk according to the flesh in the lust of uncleanness and despise authority. The first part we understand. The people of Sodom and Gomorrah, they walked in the lust and in this uncleanness. But then he adds here, and despise authority. Why do you suppose he added this part here? What does it mean when he says they despise authority? This is so crucial because whenever there's a rebellion against authority, this is only extended to God himself, right? If I despise my parents, this is why one of the 10 commandments is to honor your parents, because they're the first authoritative figure in your life. If you can't honor them, then who will you honor? Then it'll be despise your parents, then despise your teachers, despise your boss, despise the leaders of lands, and then despise God. That's only rational outcome. So in their wickedness, the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, they despised all authority. In 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 12, this is where we get to the verse that we opened up with. Whoever's got good eyes, can we read this? Can anybody see it? Or can you say it, Julie? Okay, go ahead.
But these, like a natural brute beasts made to be caught and destroyed, speak evil of the things they do not understand, and will utterly perish in their own corruption, and will receive the wages of unrighteousness, as those who count it pleasure to carouse in the daytime. They are spots and blemishes, carousing in their own deceptions while they feast with you, having eyes full of adultery, and they cannot cease from sin, enticing unstable souls. They have a heart trained in covetous practices, and are accursed children. They have forsaken the right way and gone astray, following the way of Balaam the son of Beor, who loved the wages of unrighteousness. But he was rebuked for his iniquity. A dumb donkey speaking with a man's voice restrained the madness of the prophet.
So he says, when God leaves a person or a people, they end up becoming like brute beasts, like animals, like in the wild animals, so to speak. And he says what? And will utterly perish in their own corruption. So what is he saying here? That he allows them to like execute their own, temptations and own lusts to its full extent. And the full extent of any sin and passion is ultimately death, right? It's ultimately death. And I want you to keep this in mind because it's important, we'll come back to it later. And then he says, having eyes full of adultery, and that cannot cease from sin. What happens when the grace of God is removed from us? Then there's nothing protecting us from sinning. So what will happen? We can't cease from sinning. This is what it means by having this corrupt nature, is that when the grace of God is removed, the natural tendency of humanity is towards sin, right? And again, we can just observe this around us today. And then he says, they have hearts trained in covetous practices and are accursed children, right? So he's saying they are accursed, children, as long with the adults. And let's continue. The last verse. Go ahead, Julie.
These are wells without water, clouds carried by a tempest, for whom is reserved the blackness of darkness forever. Okay,
so now we kind of see it in context. So the wells are without water is when God executes His judgment, and and He removes His grace. So then it's left with emptiness, and there's no benefit from them anymore. They become useless. Okay? So we'll speak today about the destruction of two cities and deliverance of a righteous man. So we're going to talk about today? Noah? Who? Lot. Good. Lot and his family. And we'll speak about, does anybody know what chapter this came from in the book of Genesis? Just figure I'd take a chance. It's chapter 19. Okay, chapter 19. All right, so we'll speak about the depravity of Sodom and Gomorrah. We'll speak about God's judgment and what it means, the expansion of sin. So we'll speak about Lot, we'll speak about his wife, and we'll speak about his daughters, and we'll conclude with, just some comments about the mercy of God. So what is the depravity of Sodom and Gomorrah? Did anybody remember when the first time it's mentioned about the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah? If anybody has an idea what's happening in this picture, it might be a clue. Yeah, when Lot chose the land. Do you remember what happened right before then? So this is in chapter 13, I believe. So at this time, Abraham had left Canaan because of the famine, and he went down to Egypt, right? And he stayed in Egypt, and this is where, he told Pharaoh that Sarah is my sister, and that story, right? And finally, when she was returned to him, the famine was over, and then they went back up north to Canaan, right? And then both of them began to be very prosperous, both Lot and Abraham. And of course, Lot was prosperous because of Abraham, because God was with him. And then they had so much stuff, and cattle and all their belongings, that the land wasn't big enough for them. So then what does Abraham do? It says, so Abraham said to Lot, please let there be no strife between you and me. And by the way, Abraham's his uncle, right? So he's the older one. Please let there be no strife between you and me, and between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brethren. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If you take the left, then I will go to the right. If you go to the right, then I will go to the left. So Abraham says, the choice is yours. You want to go this way? I'll go this way, no problem. You go left, I'll go right. You go north, I'll go south. It doesn't matter where you choose. So then what does Lot do? Somebody can read this? Right? You can pass it so everybody can take a turn. Mariam, go ahead.
And Lot lifted his eyes and saw all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as you go toward
Zoar.
Then Lot chose for himself the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated from each other. Abraham dwelt in the lands of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tents even as far as Sodom. But the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked and sinful against the Lord.
Okay. So then Abraham looked up and he said, you know, that valley where the Jordan River is, it's very fertile. And it's like he described it as like the garden of the Lord, which is like paradise, like the Garden of Eden. A very prosperous land. So he looked and says, you know what, this looks amazing. I can grow my wealth and my business here. Let me go there, right? So he goes there, and then where does Abraham go? So he goes east, and Abraham goes to Canaan, the promised land, right? So he dwells in Canaan, and then Lot dwells in the valley where Sodom and Gomorrah were. But notice, even from this moment, it says that the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked and sinful against the Lord. So he got there, and they were already, doing wickedness, right? But what happened? He stayed. Why? Well, because it's prosperous, And again, this is from the very beginning. And I'll make this point later, but I want to emphasize that he went there, and there was still wickedness, and he continued to do it because there was some worldly gain to himself. Sometimes we will be tempted with this. There could be worldly gain, or gain in your career or whatever, but the environment perhaps doesn't necessarily have to be wicked, but it can be bad influence. They could ask of you things, that you don't feel comfortable with. I remember when I was in college, I was doing a fellowship over the summer, and it was in a company, and they would take out the residents like every Wednesday, and they would take us out to dinner and so on. So I went for the first time, not being naive as I was. I thought it was going to be a dinner. So we went and we had dinner, and then it turned into bottle of wine after bottle of wine after bottle of wine. The company's paying for it. So it was all the expensive stuff and the good stuff. So they all, would do this. And that was the last time I went, right? And they kept going. But what you noticed during the course of the intern is that those who attended these gatherings got favoritism from the management that were taking them out, of course, right? So, but I was like, that's okay. I'm okay with that. I'd rather not go than, I'd rather not go than have a promotion or whatever it is. So sometimes you'll be tested, So this is what happened with Sodom. He chose to stay. So we will come back to this, but if we're in this story, Abraham, he sees the same valley of the Sodom and Gomorrah. He saw its prosperity and also its wickedness when he looked there. At the end of the story of the burning of Sodom and Gomorrah, it's really awkward, really weird, because it's has story of Lot, and then it mentions this little part about Abraham looking at the land of Sodom and Gomorrah, and then it comes down to his daughters, the incidents with him and Lot and his daughters. So it's as if the Bible inputs this one part here about Abraham looking at the land in its destruction. So he saw in the beginning how it's prosperous and everything, and at the end of this story, you'll find its destruction. So it says here in Genesis 18, this is again the chapter right before the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. It says, the Lord said, because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grave, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry against it that has come to me, and if not, I will know. Does the Bible record anybody reporting to God about the sins of Sodom? Was anybody complaining to God about the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah? Like we can say, the people of Israel, when they're in Egypt, they were crying out to God, saying, save us. But do we know of anybody who's crying out in the land of Sodom and Gomorrah, save us? No. Maybe Lot. I'm not sure. Maybe. But we can give that to him. Maybe we can just assume that he was, and this is the outcry. But actually some of the church fathers, they comment and say it was the creation itself was crying out to God because of the wickedness that was in the city. So it reached that degree where, you know, even what is natural, the natural order of things was crying out against these people because they were going against the ordinary, against the natural. Then he says what? And he said, I will not destroy it. So remember, then he begins to this dialogue with Abraham. So Abraham said, oh my gosh, he's going to destroy the city. Let me see, you know, what's going on. So he says, if there's 50, will you destroy it? God says, no. How about 45, 30, 20? And he keeps going down until what? 10, right? He goes down until 10. And he says, I will not destroy it for the sake of 10. So the Lord went his way as soon as he had finished speaking with Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. It got to the point where I can't say anymore. I got him down to 10. So if God says there's not even 10 people, and can you imagine a city, a whole city? And again, it's prosperous, so it's not a small city. It's, you know, very wealthy, you know, astute place. There weren't 10 people that were, you know, godly or even somewhat righteous. And notice here, you know, the Bible calls, I want you to think of this, I didn't add it here just so you guys can think about it. The Bible calls Lot righteous, right? So we're going to see what Lot, you know, his story and his daughter and his wife, and these were the people that God classified as being righteous, right? So there weren't even 10 that were like Lot and his family, right? That's how bad this place was. Somebody can read this part. So now we'll begin the first part in Genesis 19.
Now the two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face toward the ground, and he said, Here now, my lords, please turn into your servant's house and spend the night, and wash your feet, then you may rise early and go on your way. And they said, No, but we will spend the night in the open square. But he insisted strongly, so they turned into him and entered his house. Then he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate.
Okay. Does Lot know that these two are angels at this point? He has no idea. So Lot is actually at the gate. There, the person who sits at the gate usually has a prominent position in the order of the city. So usually they're like working for like the mayor or whoever's governing the city. It's really like a sought after position. But when Lot was sitting there, he was waiting for the guests to come, and the guests that would come, because he knows the wickedness of the people in the city, he would try to save them from their wickedness. And maybe this is one of the things that made God consider Lot as being righteous, is that he didn't want the people that were visiting to be subject to the corruptness and wickedness of the people of the land. So he invited the people there, these two angels, and they wanted to spend the night, you know, fil hawa kida, and enjoy the breeze. And he said, no, you don't want to do that, come. And then he insisted, and he made a feast for them. Let's continue.
Before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both old and young, all the people from every quarter surrounded the house. And they called to Lot and said to him, Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, that we may know them carnally. So Lot went out to them through the doorway, shut the door behind him, and said, Please, my brethren, do not do so wickedly.
So they found out, you know, there's fresh meat inside this house. So what did they do? It says, all of the men, both young and old, all the people surrounded this house. It's like a pack of wolves around like a piece of lahma that we just, throw. They just surround them to devour them. This is exactly what was happening, right? And he begged them, please don't do this wickedness. These are visitors. Don't do this, right? But see, this is how, if you can't imagine like how bad it was, it's young and old. Can you imagine like young kids, doing this along with the old? And mind you here, look how, it's not just the men. Because what does he say? It's the men of the Sodom, both young and old, all the people from every quarter. It's hard to imagine that a corruption like this would only affect the men. Like the men are going to be like wicked, and then the women and children are all saints. Unlikely, right? It's most likely they're all wicked together, okay? And keep this in mind. All participated in this wickedness, both young and old. And as we mentioned, there weren't even 10 righteous people in the city. Next verse.
See, now I have 2 daughters who have not known a man. Please let me bring them out to you, and you may do them as you may wish. Only do nothing to these men, since this is the reason they have come under the shadow of my roof.
So he makes this unthinkable proposal that demonstrates their corruption. He's willing to give his daughters to them just to spare these 2 visitors. Again, this is unthinkable kind of exchange, right? I think in some translations it refers to the 2 daughters as being virgins. So some people look at this and say, how can they be virgins? If remember, when God told them to leave Sodom and Gomorrah, he told his sons-in-law as well. So what is the discrepancy? How do we reconcile the discrepancy? As according to the Jewish tradition, that there's two steps to a marriage. Is the first is the civil one, which is the betrothal, and then there's the actual wedding ceremony. So once you enter into the betrothal period, they're considered husband and wife, but it's not official until the wedding is, the ceremony is finished and they consummate the wedding. So they can still be considered as wife and husband, but they're still can be virgin. And look at the proposal. Lot was telling them, I'll give you women in exchange for these 2 visitors. And this angered the people. So the natural, supposed to be the natural attraction, angered the people, right? To this extent, that's how bad it was. That now you're going to tell me what's normal? And again, you can think of what's going on now these days. If you compare this to maybe the transgender movement and all this. When we speak about okay, no, I believe in the natural traditional, marriage and relations and family. It's almost an offense, right? Some people will take offense to this. How could you? This is Masharif A, and they begin to attack us because we believe in something that's traditional, right? Something that's biblical. So we see even remnants of this even today. Let's continue.
And they said, stand back. Then they said, this one came in to stay here, and he keeps acting as a judge. Now we'll deal worse with you than with them. So they pressed hard against the man Lot and came near to break down the door. But the men reached out their hands and pulled Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And they struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they became weary trying to find the door.
So then it got so bad that now the angels had to use their power to save, Lot and his family and his daughters from these wretched people. So he told Lot, stand back, and then they pulled him in. But look what the people said. They wanted Lot to move out of the way so they can have access to these 2 visitors. And it said what? This man came in to stay here, and he keeps acting as a judge. This was actually part of the duty of the person who was sitting at the gate. Is he's like a gatekeeper, right? Do you remember when Absalom, David's son, wanted to gain the favor of the people to usurp David from the kingship? What did he do? He sat at the gate of the city, and instead of the people making their way from the gate all the way to the judgment seat, he just heard their case and made a judgment as the prince. And as he judged, khalas. So then the people said, well, this is great. It's like doing people, it's like, say you had to get your license renewed or you needed to do some document, and then somebody came to your house, what, I can do it for you, and they finish it and you don't have to be troubled at all. You're like, wow, this is amazing. I like this guy. Let's vote for him next time, right? So he ended up giving the favor of all the people, right? So when they looked at Lot and they said, what, this guy's sitting at the gate, who made you a judge over us? So now they became angry with him, and they said, we will do worse with you than with them. So they turned on him in just a moment, just like that. Before, they tolerated him, but now because they deprived them of fulfilling a passion, he turned on them just like that. And they're willing to kill him and to get him as well. Was their sin only sexual in nature? Of course, we know it's homosexual. The sin is homosexuality. But was their sin only sexual? What else could it be? Okay, well, the sexual is against God too? Sure. Think of the whole scenario. Was it just to satisfy their sexual pleasure? There's something else going on. Anyone want to take a stab? Okay. So basically, there's bodily passion, right? And when this bodily passion increases to greater desire, and when we have this great desire that's unmet or unfulfilled, what happens? It turns into anger. And then this anger turns into what? Violence, right? It becomes violent. So these men had this unmet, desire that burned in them and made them angry and was making them violent to the point where they're surrounding the house like a mob, right? So, and again, this was the progression of sin. Once it gets us ensnared and we continue to go in it and indulge in it, then it burns within us. And then when this, passion isn't fulfilled, it leads to anger and possibly violence. And this doesn't have to be like bodily, like sexual. It can be like the sin of affirmation from like people, like pride, right? When I post something or I do something to garnish the attention of other people. And then maybe every time I post something, I get positive feedback and it makes me feel good. And then when I post something and no one responds, there's something inside me that gets angry. And then I say, okay, maybe let me ask my friends, and hey, did you see the thing that I post? Why didn't you comment? Again, it's kind of like the same thing. I didn't get this fulfilled desire, so now I'm going after those whom I expect to fulfill this desire. You didn't comment on here, right? So it's not only, the bodily. So then we see the next part here is the judgment of God. Somebody else can read.
Then the men said to Lot, "Have you anyone else here, son-in-law, your sons, your daughters, and whomever you have in the city? Take them out of this place, for we will destroy this place, because the outcry against them has grown great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it." So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law, who had married his daughters, and said, "Get up, get out of this place, for the Lord will destroy the city." But to his sons-in-law he seemed to be joking.
Okay. So then God tells him, okay, get all the people you can. Do you have any relatives, in-laws? Get everybody. So Lot says, okay, I have these, sons-in-law. So then, and mind you, it says here that when it says, for we will destroy this place, who's we? Who's we? I can't hear who's talking. The angels, right. The angels are saying this, okay? We will destroy this place. I want you to keep this in mind, because when I'll give you the hint, but when you read the passage, I want you to pay attention. When it comes to the destruction, it says, we will destroy the city. But when the brimstone comes down from heaven, it will say the Lord destroyed the city, okay? To make sure that it's, okay, they're the messenger, but the one who's executing the judgment is God, right? Just keep this in mind. So he went and he found his sons-in-law and told them, hey, we need to get out of here. The city's going to be destroyed. And then what was their response? Are you kidding me? Why did they have this kind of reaction? Why did they think he was joking? And does this remind you of a similar scenario where there's this impending judgment and then they thought it wasn't a big deal, they were just kidding? Did you guys take like a tranquilizer today before you came? Was like, maybe they would have thought God would be more patient. But given the scenario of Sodom and Gomorrah, do you think they were even thinking of God? It was not even there. They were actually so wealthy and everything was there and they're having a great old time, all their needs were fulfilled, they didn't even think about God. What does God have to do with us? It has nothing to do with us. Do you know the country that has the highest rate of atheism? Did you say Israel? Israel? No. They believe in God, they're Jews. Switzerland, yeah. Why? Because they're the wealthiest country, right? Per capita, they're the wealthiest. They have so much, I think it's upward of 80%, right, of the country's atheist. They don't mind people that believe, but they could care less. Why? Because everything's, we have everything. So when he came and told them that God's going to destroy this city, they're like, yeah, whatever. You're just joking, right? They didn't take it serious. Doesn't this remind you of what happened with the time of Noah? Noah spends like these 100+ years building the ark, telling them, hey guys, God's going to flood the city. And they're like, you're foolish, right? God's not doing anything. This kind of stuff doesn't happen, right? And then one day it did happen. It's God's responsibility as a righteous and loving judge to put an end to evil when the need arises. So if God didn't do this, we wouldn't consider him as being God, and he wouldn't be righteous, and he wouldn't be loving or just. Why wouldn't we love? People can look at this story and says, this isn't loving to kill everyone, including the women and children. This isn't loving, this isn't merciful. How is God doing this? But sometimes we think this, but we remove ourselves from the scenario of what's going on. This place was very wicked, as we explained earlier. Imagine I know when I was growing up in the 80s, there was a serial killer named Ted Bundy. You heard of him? You guys heard of him, okay. So he was in Florida running rampant and doing all sorts of atrocious things. And they finally caught him, right? And he was sentenced to the death sentence. What if one day that judge comes and says, you know what, despite the overwhelming evidence, I think I need to be merciful and set him free? What would we think? What would we say? Wow, would we cheer and say, good job? Of course, maybe now, in this day and age, maybe, but back then, absolutely not, right? Absolutely not. This is what we say, this is what he deserves. This is judgment. So imagine this is one person. Imagine if a whole city, young and old, are doing this. And then God executes judgment. What if you were in the surrounding city? And then you needed to do business with these people. And every time you go there, you're being harassed. And you tell your wife and your daughter, you can't come close to the city. You need to be far enough where you can't even see it, because they're that wicked. You feel very uncomfortable, very unsafe. So when God executes judgment, maybe he does a favor. But again, some people say, what about the children? The text doesn't specify gender or age, as I mentioned, in those who were unrighteous. It mentions everyone, both young and old. It says, now before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both old and young, all the people from every quarter surrounded the house. So it was everybody. It's unreasonable to assume that children become righteous without positive influences. Even with positive influences, there is still a chance that children come out to be wicked, right? Imagine now if there's zero positive influence. Is there a chance these children come out to be righteous? Extremely. So where would they get it from? If the whole city was surrounding a house, there's nobody at church, there's nobody, Lot was the closest thing to being righteous, and he was at the gate, right, trying to protect the people. Do you think the children of these people attacking are going to say, you know what, I want to be with Lot? No, there's no way. It's very difficult. And as we know, children inherit bad habits from their parents. And they say that the younger that the bad habit is perceived by the child, the easier it is for them to develop that habit. So say for example, I have an angry parent, right, who's very angry. If the parent expresses this anger in front of the child from a young age, they have a higher chance of becoming angry themselves and being filled with rage. But if the parents can hide this from the child, maybe they fight in private and they never fight in front of the child, And then when the child gets in high school, he realizes, you know what, his dad's an angry person or his mom's an angry person. The likelihood of him developing is still there, but it's not as much as if he was exposed to it when he was young. Look what St. Gregory the theologian says about this children part. He says, "Yet here too he makes a gain, namely death, and the cutting off of sin." So he says, death here is a gain. Why? By cutting off of sin, in order that evil may not be immortal. Thus his punishment is changed into a mercy, for it is in mercy, I am persuaded, that God inflicts punishment. So St. Gregory looks at something like this not as something like an evil, but he looks at this as something that's actually showing mercy. Perhaps one of these children who were killed in this fire, they were too young to be held responsible for their sin, and maybe, if anyone, could steal the kingdom of heaven because they were too young to understand their sin. And they just did it because of the people around them. Maybe in God's mercy, these could inherit the kingdom, right? So he looks at this as being an act of mercy, that he even took this, did this, judge them in this way. So St. Gregory looks at it as a mercy. What about the expansion of sin? We'll now examine, does anybody have any questions so far? Okay, we're going to look at Lot and his family quick here with the remaining of the time. I'll just handle Lot and we'll examine kind of his slow drift. How many of us have swam in the ocean before? And then you're swimming there and you leave your little tent or your umbrella, and then you're swimming, and then all of a sudden you look up and you look straight ahead and your umbrella's not there anymore. Where is it? It's over there. And depending on the current, if the current's really big, it can be really far, and you're like, well, how did this happen? It's kind of scary, right? Because you can end up somewhere very far very quickly, right? Anybody ever got caught in a rip current? Good. Those are hard, those are deadly. Be careful. So this slow drift can be unnoticeable, but it can be very devastating. So let's look at Lot's drift. In Hebrews chapter 2, what does he say? He says, "Therefore we must give the more earnest heed to the things we have heard, lest we drift away." So he warns us, St. Paul warns us of this drifting away. We need to be careful, because if we're not, we can easily drift away. Where did we say his first encounter with Sodom was? Lot. Remember when him and Abraham split, right? It said that he looked in this place was like the garden. So he looked at Sodom and Gomorrah as being like another Eden, the garden of the Lord. So he looked at it as a place where he can thrive and is very wealthy, right? This was his first thing. But then what did he do when he saw the wealth there and he observed some of the wickedness? What did he do? He went anyways, all right? And this is what we call the lust of the eyes, where something seems, it could potentially have some danger, but I'm enticed by the reward more, by the pleasure more, so I go hoping that I can make a difference, or I can change this area, I can change this person, I can do this, or I can go to this place and this not affect me. All of these, things that we come up in our mind to justify my going to this place or being, close to these people, right? This is the lust of the eyes. And then he chose for himself the best land. It should have been like something should have clicked in his mind when his uncle says, "You choose." If somebody kid was muhtaram, right, and the elder says, "You choose," we would say what? No, tfaddal anta, you go first, young. It's like, it's like if somebody's like Abuna or Sayyidina is coming through the door, and the Sayyidina is holding the door open for you, you're just gonna walk right in? I hope not. I hope we would say, "No, tfaddal Sayyidina, you go first," right? And I hold the door and he goes in, right? But this was like Abraham said, "Tfaddal, you choose." Okay, I'll choose the best one. Now, you need to be a little humble here, okay? You should let him go first, right? So this was the beginning. He was looking for his personal gain, regardless of even the faulty etiquette that he had. Then he separated himself from a godly man. He separated himself from good company, right? Abraham was like, from when he left, his homeland, Lot was with him everywhere. And because of this, Lot was successful. So now is the point where he says, I think I got this on my own. What he didn't realize was that Abraham was his protector, right? Because God was with Abraham. So as soon as he left this godly company. And it says what? Then Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain and pitched his tent. So we notice two things here, right? That he dwelt in the plain, right? So usually this is outside of the city, right? So when his first move came to Sodom, and maybe he looked and said, there's a lot of wickedness here. Let me just, stay on the outskirts. And did he build a mansion? He said, I'm going to live in a tent because that's what Abraham did. So I'm just going to pitch myself a tent, right? So he pitched himself a tent right outside the city of Sodom and Gomorrah. Then he began to say, this land is great. I'm making a lot of money. The people are wicked, but they're doing their thing. I'm doing my thing, but I'm getting more wealthy. So then what happens? Then we see in the beginning of 19 that he worked his way up the corporate ladder, and he was the one who was chosen to sit at the gate, to be the gatekeeper. And not only was he chosen to sit at the gatekeeper, but where does he dwell? So they turned into him and entered his house. So he went from being with Abraham to coming pretty close to Sodom and Gomorrah, but dwelling outside of it in a tent, just in case I need to move. And he said, I like this place. So he goes into the heart of the city, finds himself a permanent residence, goes up the corporate ladder, and now he's sitting at the gate as kind of the gatekeeper, right? Step by step. It's just like you'll find sometimes, your first job, you'll take whatever you want, and then they say, okay, if you go on and climb up the corporate ladder, you need to give a little bit more time. You need to work a little bit harder. I need more hours from you. But I have a family. Well, if you want to make it in this company, you got to be willing to sacrifice. Say, okay. And you come home and say, honey, I'm sorry. This work is going to demand X, Y, Z from me. It'll only be temporary. And then one thing leads to another, and they say, okay, well, I need you to travel. But I go to church on Sunday. Well, again, if you want to make it, you got to be willing to sacrifice. And believe me, the reward is great. We'll give you a bonus. We'll give you Masharif A. You'll get a promotion. So then all this starts to entice you. And you begin to take this offer. And then you find yourself, after some time, you're working 7 days a week. You have no idea what maybe in the future your children are doing, your wife or husband is doing, what's going on at home. Your relationship isn't in the best situation because you're never home. So then things begin to snowball. All because of what happened. This gradual drift, okay? Then it says this, and then we said this, he was as a judge. Sin operates insidiously, which means it's a gradual change that almost is unnoticed, like this drifting. Remember what St. Paul warns us, says, do not be deceived, evil company corrupts good habits. Does this happen in one gathering? No, it usually doesn't. But it's the continual gathering, after gathering, after gathering. Then we start to tell ourselves, what's a word here, what's a word there? I can go with them, but I'm not going to participate. Then they pressure you into participating, and you end up kind of doing a little bit, and you find yourself at the end, you're doing just like they are, and everyone's in the same boat together, right? So we have to be careful. Evil company corrupts good habits. This will aid the drift away from God. Surrounding yourself with evil company, even online, is tormenting. You might say, wow, one is kind of a strong word. But look how St. Paul or St. Peter describes it. We read this. He says, "And the righteous Lot, who was oppressed by the filthy conduct of the wicked, for that righteous man dwelling among them tormented his righteous soul from day to day by seeing and hearing their lawless deeds." It's a torment. It's a torment. It's like being somewhere and you're constantly bombarded by sin that you hate. It's a different story if you like the sin and you enjoy the sin. But if you hate the sin and you're surrounded by it, then it's a torment, right? And by the way, this is where we try to go in our repentance, to get to hate the sin. You know, this is real true repentance, as His Holiness Pope Shenouda used to say, is not refraining from doing a sin, but it's hating the sin, right? So if I'm to the point where I hate the sin, and then that's all I'm surrounded with, this is a torment. I'm praying at home, you know, doing matanyas and fasting, trying to live a godly life, and then I go to this place and surrounded by a complete opposite, right? It's literally like living in hell while trying to live a godly life. So this is surrounding yourself with evil company, even online, is tormenting. So who we choose to socialize with online and the content we consume online can be a torment to me if I'm trying to live a godly and righteous life. This is why part of our repentance and our return to God doesn't only have to do with, you know, modifying my environment, you know, in real life, like in the reality, but also in the online space as well. Because I can do things in reality, but if it doesn't translate online where I'm spending a lot of my time, then again, you're just fighting each other. It's just a torment. So it should be both. And as we know, sin has an alluring nature. It kind of attracts us, but then there's poison behind or after this attraction. Then he gets to the point where he's warned, leave now. Now's the time. Now's when we have to, you know, cut it off. So it says here, when the morning had dawned, the angels urged Lot to hurry, saying, arise, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be consumed in the punishment of the city. And while he lingered, the men took hold of his hand, his wife's hand, and the hands of his 2 daughters, the Lord being merciful to him. And they brought him out and set him outside the city. So it came to pass, when they had brought them outside, that he said, escape for your life. Do not look behind you, nor stay anywhere in the plain. Escape to the mountains, lest you be destroyed. So the angel says, the destruction's coming now. Get out of here. And then it says that Lot and his family, they lingered. What are they lingering here for? Why do you suppose they were lingering? It's good, but there's a lot of things to consider here. Okay, I'm in this place, I have an awesome job, right? Or at least in the sense of making a lot of money, right? It's very secure. I have my house, I have my possessions, I have my, you know, chariot. You didn't have cars back then, but I had my car, my house, my livelihood, my money's in the bank here, and it's all secure. And then you're telling me to leave all of this? So they're lingering, thinking, okay, well, I left Abraham and came here and made a name for myself, and then just like that, I'm going to leave with nothing? So there was this hesitation, right? Just like with the rich young ruler, there was this hesitation. He went away sorrowful. So then it says here, out of God's mercy, he had the angels just take them by force, right? They were lingering, slow to their feet. They said, no, we got to go now. So the angel takes Lot in one hand, his wife in the other. The other angel takes his 2 daughters, said, we're getting out of here. And they like drag them and pull them out of the city, right? And as they're going out, he tells them, don't look back. Don't look back. And this, again, is God showing His love and mercy even in the midst of our reluctance to do His will. You know, sometimes, you know, we feel like, okay, if I don't do God's will, or if I do it even reluctantly, God is not happy with me and He doesn't like me. But look here, God He understands their situation and He understands their lingering. But He knows this place, they can't grow as long as they're here. They can't grow in His love and the communion with Him being here. So we said, I understand, you know, your calculations, but we need to go now, we need to go now. Like, so He takes them and He leaves. So we see even in our reluctance to obey His commandments, He's very patient, He's still loving, right? And He will aid us. But we just need to trust Him, trust His lead. Where He guides me, I should follow. Then it says what? Then Lot said to them, please know, my lords, indeed now your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have increased your mercy, which you have shown me by saving me. But I cannot escape to the mountains, lest some evil overtake me and I die. So now this city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. Please let me escape there. It is not a little one. Is it not a little one? And my soul shall live. And he said to him, See, I have found favor. I have favored you concerning this thing also, and that I will not overthrow this city for which you have spoken. So he says, send me to another city. Don't let me go to the mountain, because I'm scared something bad's going to happen to me there. Let me go to this small city. So then basically God is telling what, or the angel is saying what? For your sake, this city will be spared. Right? This small city will be spared. And he says, hurry, escape there, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there. Therefore, the name of the Lord of the city was called Zoar, which means small, like a small city. So he even allows Lot to dictate where he goes. God told him to go to the mountain. He says, I'm scared. And imagine, in this position, you're being taken out of the city by two angels, right, who are sparing you from imminent destruction. And they're going to say, we're going to go here to hide. And you say, I don't want to go hide somewhere else. They're coming to save you. Wherever they say, just go, because they know best. What if you went to that city and something happened to that city? You don't know. And perhaps this was the plan, but God spared it. And by the way, it was this whole region. Sodom and Gomorrah were the two major cities, but this whole region was burned. And the archaeological evidence shows when you go do a cross-section of the area there's actually a burned layer that's dark, that's black, in the ground there. So, Lot's wife, figured this deserves. I found this picture. It deserves kind of a slide by itself. So, she was looking back at the world, the things she left behind. So, what about Lot's wife? She says, and the New Testament refers to Lot's wife twice. In Luke 9, the Lord says, no one having put his hand on the plow and looking back is fit for the kingdom of God. And this we know, right? That if I want to go to the kingdom of God, I can't look back to the world. Just like the people of Israel. When the people of Israel left Egypt, what was their sin in the wilderness? Is they kept desiring to be back in Egypt. They said, yes, in Egypt we were bond servants and we were slaves and working hard, but at least we filled our bellies. And God says, well, I gave you freedom. You're not free, you're not under Pharaoh anymore. I gave you this liberty. And because of their rebellion and complaining against God, God says, you need some time in the wilderness. I'm not going to take you to Canaan now. Actually, your whole generation is going to die, except for 2 people. And then your children will be the ones who go to the promised land because of the complaining that you're doing. I set you free, but you want bondage again. Right? So no one puts his hand on the plow towards the kingdom of God and should be looking backward. We should be looking forward towards the kingdom. Then in Luke 17, what does he say? He says, likewise, as it was also in the days of Lot, they ate, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they built. But on the day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. So even so will it be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed. What day is he referring to here? The second coming, right? Second coming. In that day, he who is on the housetop and his goods are in the house, let him not come down to take them away. And likewise the one who is in the field, let him not turn back. Remember Lot's wife. So he says, well, there's going to come a day where the trumpet's going to sound, and when that sound trumpets, don't look back. That's why it's important for us to keep in our mind the kingdom of heaven. In our prayers, every time I come to church, in my work, in my car. Because at the end of the day, this whole world will come to an end. Only thing that will remain would be our trajectory towards heaven. If my mind is on heavenly things, then when he comes, I'll be ready. I'll look at this and say, okay, what's coming is far greater than what I had. Even if I was a multi-billionaire here on earth. Nothing comparing to the beauty that's going to be in heaven. St. Paul says, no eye has seen, nor ear heard, the things which those who love God will see in the kingdom of heaven. She was an example to those who perhaps start a life with God, but desire to go back to the world. It's not about starting the spiritual life, but it's about finishing, right? And starting the spiritual life is if we start it in an authentic way, in a true and honest way, then we ought not to look back to the world. It doesn't mean we don't live here and we all go to the monastery or convents and that's it. No. But it means that my eye is on heaven. I use the things in the world and I use them to glorify God and to serve other people, but my eyes are on the kingdom of heaven. It's not on here. So the moment where God asks me, okay, I need you to sacrifice something from here, you'll say, okay, no problem. And you know, this can start from small things. God can work with us with small things. You know, maybe you guys can relate. I remember my first car that I got, you know, when I was like 16. It was like this Honda Civic, and right when I got it, I was taking care of it. I was washing it and cleaning it like every weekend, and it was great. And I think for like first 2 months, it's got like scratched like 10 times. Every time they would get, and nothing. Like I would go to the grocery store, come back, and there's a scratch on it. I'd park in the front of the house and come back, there's a scratch on it. And I say, no, hey, God's teaching me something. Don't be obsessed with this, right? So then I say, you know what, forget it. I'm not going to chase this. I'm going to leave it. And I got scratched after that. So every God was teaching me, you know what, just forget about it. I want a day when I want you to give up something, you just say, okay, no problem, right? So I might do the same with you. Whatever it is that maybe you think you're attached to. You'll find maybe if I'm so attached to my phone, maybe one day you'll drop it and it cracks and breaks. And you need like a whole day or two without it until you get a new one. Maybe, right? Again, God will work with us with the things that we're attached to. But just remember Lot's wife. We mentioned the Israelites in Exodus. Some look at the ways of sin. Listen to this carefully. Some look at the ways of sin and wish they were granted an opportunity to live in sin and or to be ignorant, or their conscience is free from ignorance of the ways of God. What do I mean here? Sometimes when we go and we're following the ways of God, we know that it's right and we believe it 100%. But sometimes when we see the people around us indulging in a sin, we say to ourselves, you know, I wish I grew up in their family and having their parents who could care less what they do and they can go out and party and have a good time. I wish I grew up kind of in their family for a moment. So we're tempted with this. And then sometimes we're tempted, you know what, I wish I didn't know God like I know Him just for a little bit, so when I do these things, my conscience doesn't rebuke me, right? We have to be careful with this because, again, this is like Lot's wife. It's looking back to the time of bondage. We think this is pleasure, but it's actually bondage. He who commits sin is a slave of sin, right? It's bondage, right? So looking back, wishing these things, it's temptation from the enemy, and we ought to dispel them immediately. What about his daughters? Last few minutes here. It says, now the firstborn said to the younger, and I'm going to shorten this, only selected a few verses because it's a lengthy passage in the chapter. Now the firstborn said to the younger, our father is old, and there is no man on the earth to come in to us as is the custom of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve the lineage of our father. So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. And then, of course, the younger does the same. And then it says, thus both the daughters of Lot were with child by their father. Where do you suppose the daughters got this idea? In Sodom. This was probably like, again, they're doing this with their father who's a man. This probably might have been a virtue in Sodom, right? But of course we look at this and this is like the horrible incest. No way, right? Maybe they got it from Sodom, or most likely, Annie, that's where they got it. But what would make them think that they were the last two women on the face of the earth? Did God say He's going to burn the world? No. He told them He's just going to burn Sodom and Gomorrah. Perhaps they were scared. They were going to this, and remember they were going to Zoar, which is a small city. Do you think there are no men or women in this city? There wouldn't be a city, right? So again, you see the remnants, of sin, that even we can call him righteous, a lot righteous, but it certainly affected his children whether he liked it or not, no matter how righteous he was, right? No matter how righteous he was. Their resolution, of course, was materialistic and earthly, and they did not depend on God. They didn't consider the one who saved us and took us out in a miraculous way. Can he not then provide and protect us and provide us with lineage, right? Do we know, by the way, who their sons were? Anybody know? Yeah, the older daughter had a son whose name was Moab, and this would be the father or the patriarch of the Moabites. And what about the other one? Yeah, she had a son named Ben Ami, which is like one of the father, or son of the father, or the son of my people. And this one will be the patriarch of the Ammonites. And both the Moabites and the Ammonites were the two people that were like a thorn in Israel's side for all of history, right? They were always like their enemies, right? Why? Because of, this is where it came out of. For this is like, out of Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah came the two enemies of the people of God. Again, all from Sodom and Gomorrah. Of course, this reminds us of Sarah and Hagar. When the promise was that you'll have a son from Abraham. So she couldn't wait for God to fulfill the promise. So she said, Hagar, take Abraham, bear a son for me. I said, no. God said, no, this is not my plan. You need to wait for me. And then God waited until Sarah was old in age and said, you know what? This is right before this, chapter 18 is when he sends them the angel to tell them that Sarah's going to have a child, right? So wait till she's old, and then he says, you know what? You're going to have a child in your old age. And she laughed and thought that he was joking. So again, the idea here, depend on God, right? Trust Him. I want to read this few verses or this passage from Origin about these two daughters. And it's just a good explanation, so I didn't want to paraphrase it. We'll just read it together. He says, after these things, now that well-known story is related in which it is written that Lot's daughters cunningly lay with their father by stealth. In this matter, I do not know if anyone can so excuse Lot as to free him from sin. Nor again do I think he should be accused that he ought to become partly to such serious incest. For I do not find him to have plotted against or to have violently snatched away the chastity of his daughters, but rather to have been victim of a plot and cunningly ensnared. So he's saying what? I don't justify what he did, nor do I, excuse him. Right? So he says he didn't trick his daughters. It wasn't to take advantage of them. They, on the contrary, are the ones who enticed him. Right? So, we can't blame him for that part. But he says, but neither would he have been ensnared by the girls unless he could have been inebriated, which means like intoxicated. So he's saying here that this would have never happened if he wasn't intoxicated. What led him? Did they force the wine down his throat? No, they kept presenting it to him and he kept drinking. The Habibi, stop. This has the potential to get you drunk. No, but he still continued. And this played into their plot. And he continued to the point where he was so drunk he had no idea who was in front of him or what was happening. Right? Thus he seems to me to be found partly culpable and partly excusable. For indeed he can be excused because he is free of the offense of concupiscence and pleasure, and because he is shown neither to have wished nor to have consented to those wishing. Then he says what? But he is at fault because he could be trapped, because he indulged in wine too much, and this not once, but he did it a second time. For instance, even Scripture seems to me to make excuse for him in a certain manner when he says, for he did not know when he slept with them and when he arose. This is not said of the daughters who intentionally and cunningly deceived their father. He, however, was so senseless from wine that he did not know that he lay with his older daughter or with his younger daughter. Listen to the next part. He says, hear what drunkenness does. Hear what an outrage, intoxication produces. Hear and beware, you who do not hold that evil to be a fault, but practice it, the evil of the drinking of wine to intoxication. Drunkenness deceives him whom Sodom did not deceive. Drunkenness deceived the one whom Sodom didn't. So if Satan couldn't catch him in Sodom, he caught him with the wine. He caught him to be intoxicated. He wasn't aware of his judgment, and then he fell. Right? He lived in Sodom and tried to keep his chastity. That's why they call him righteous. But then he fell in the sin of wine and drinking alcohol. He whom the sulfurous flame did not burn is burned by the flames of women. So Origen here warns us of the danger of drinking a drink that is intoxicating. And it's not just drink now, we can expand it to any kind of a drug that impairs our judgment. Two quick last slides here. Where does God's mercy in this whole story? I want you to give me some examples. Just quick, rattle them off. Where do we see God's mercy? Ben. Excellent. He dragged them out of the city and when they were lingering. What else? He allowed them, to flee to the city. Great. He allowed them and said, you know what? Fine. I'll be merciful and let you go to the city and not the mountain. Great. What else? Punishing two cities. Of course, that we saw that St. Gregory looked at this as a mercy. What else? He didn't destroy the daughters or the dad because of the sin. Great. How about the beginning of the story? The preface to the story with Abraham. The whole negotiating with Abraham, right? The fact that he said, okay, is there 50, 45, 30, 20? This whole negotiation is God's mercy. I'm willing to have mercy even if there are 10 people. But there weren't 10 people, right? Good. So I think we said them all. And this one where it says, hurry, escape, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there. So he refrains from doing anything to Sodom and Gomorrah until they are secure. Again, this shows God's mercy. Just in conclusion, wells without water are those who resist the work of God and their life. Sin causes a drought in our spiritual life. And this occurs insidiously or gradually. We need to be careful. This is why we can't stress enough the importance of sitting with our Father of Confession on a regular basis. Because if I'm drifting, he can help me not to drift and point out where I'm kind of drifting away. And sometimes we'll sit with our Father of Confession and he tells us something, and because I don't really like what he says, I remain absent from seeing him for an extended period of time. If this is the case, this is a sign of drifting. The fact that I'm avoiding because I didn't like what he said. Just go back, talk, and maybe in this discussion between you and him, this can be resolved, or he can help you to get over it. Beware, of course, of bad company, because this aids our drift. Do not look back. Keep our eyes focused on heaven. And so the moment where God asks us to give up something on earth, we can say, sure, no problem. Very easy. Okay, I'll do it. Why? Because I know you're with me. That's what Abraham did. Abraham didn't care where he went. But as long as God is with him, he will prosper. Even if he would have went to Sodom and Gomorrah, this he will prosper, right? Because God was with him. Beware of intoxicating sin. And lastly, cherish God's mercy and follow him. There you will find security and rest for your soul. As we say in the Psalm of the Good Shepherd, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want or need of anything. He takes me down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still water. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. In the mercy and loving embrace of our Father is where we find rest and where we find comfort and security, regardless of, the things that are around us. Anybody have any questions or comments? Yes, sir. Of course, God knew from the beginning He was going to destroy it. But He just allowed Abraham to go into the discussion with him because He loved him. And actually said, what prefaced this is, He said to Abraham, I can't hide anything from my servant. As if he's like the one who's governing things and God is like working for him. But of course not, right? So out of His humility and His love, He says, I'm going to destroy this. And He says, and He knows his nephew is there. But He wants to spare His nephew. Then He begins this negotiation, and God knows very well how many people there are. But He allows him, He goes with him. And that's why when Abraham finally got to 10, he said, okay, God knows that there's not even 10 people. But he knew, okay, as God did with the people of Nineveh, as He did with the people of Israel, when there's a people who are willing to repent, He saves them. He sends them a messenger to save them from the judgment, right? So He knew. At the time of Noah, He saved Noah and his family because they were the only ones who believed, right? So He knew God's pattern. So He trusted Him, okay, this is His judgment, I trust Him. So He knew He would save those who are righteous. Yeah. Any other questions? Comments? Okay. Glory be to God forever. Amen. Let's say a prayer.